Spread the fire. Welcome back to SMWX. So glad to have you aboard. And I am extremely excited today because we have the president of the African Transformation Movement, Vuyolwetu Zungula. It is such a pleasure to have you with us. Thanks for joining us on SMWX.
Thank you, and greetings to the viewers as well.
Enkosi ngokuza tata.
You can see your Xhosa is improving.
Hayi no siyazama. Ndiyasithetha isiXhosa sintsokothileyo tata.
Oh, kuhle kuhle. Bani isiduko sakho?
Ndingulubelo.
Oh,
Hlubi.
eh, oh,
Khoza.
kuhlukwazi. Ngujola ke lona udosini unqabashi. Ithole lomthwakazi.
No. Enkosi ngokuza tata.
All right, kulungile.
Yeah. Wow, we might as well just masithetha ngesiXhosa. But you know, I think ATM is a really interesting movement in this election. A new entrant, although you're not as new as many people think you are. But a lot of people have been blown away by some of your performances in the by-elections and realize that this is something that needs to be taken quite seriously. Take us through just some of the groundwork that's been happening in the Eastern Cape, in Doornkop, for example, where you did very well, and take us through how you're performing so well in some of these by-elections.
Firstly, the ATM there was a long thought process before the formation of the ATM. And there was a lot of consultation between all of these organizations that are now supporting the ATM. Therefore, when the ATM was formed, it already had a base because you consulted a lot of various organizations and a lot of people. Now, the groundwork that we've done was basically to reach out to as many people as possible. Hence, you find that the performance of the by-election, and remember with the by-election, the voter turnout, it's normally very low.
Sure.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people will be surprised and shocked on the 8th of May because the voter turnout for national elections, it's quite higher than the by-elections.
Well, I mean, the thing is, many parties say that, but you actually have something to back it up. So in Nyandeni, for example, you came away with around 30%. For a new party, that's unheard of. Take us through just that by-election and what you think brought you to that point in that by-election.
Yes. The first thing with the ATM is that when you speak to the people, what attracts people to the ATM is the values. Because many political parties, they focus on the social governance issues when they want to provide solutions. But the ATM speaks firstly about values because we discount the human element so many times when it comes to the governance of the country. If we were to look in our country, corruption is caused by the human element. Crime is caused by the human element. So there's a lot of things that have the human element as the source of the problems. Therefore, when you speak about the values of peace, ubuntu, transformation, servant leadership, and accountability, you are addressing as to what kind of a person do you want in society, because society produces people that will be in governance. So you cannot have a society that has a lot of corrupt people, then you think you'll have a government that is not going to be corrupt. So when you speak about the ATM, it goes to the source of the problems rather than dealing just with the symptoms.
And in Doornkop, you also did pretty well, getting 5%. So the Nyandeni wasn't just a once-off.
Yes.
I'm just interested in your strategy and the way you've brought together this different coalition of forces to operate within the ATM. So take us through the different forces that make up this party, from faith-based institutions also to traditional leadership institutions, so that we can get a fuller understanding of this coalition of forces.
Yeah. Previously, you had in our country African indigenous churches. Now, a lot of these African indigenous churches were not really consulted when it comes to the governance issues because it's only the mainline churches that are part of the SACC, South African Council of Churches.
Sure.
Now, when government says we've consulted with these churches, they only refer to the ACCC. Now, the ACC does not include ZCC, does not include the apostolic churches. In fact, it does not include many churches that have a number, that have like a lot of members. So when the ATM was formed, initially the idea was to have a voice for these churches. However, when now the churches started to speak to as many individuals as possible. A lot of ordinary citizens says what the country needs is not another Christian party. What the South Africa needs now, it is a party that will embrace everyone, that will protect everyone, that will advance the interests of everyone. Therefore, that is why currently you've got Muslims in the ATM, you've got Rastafarians in the ATM. Basically, you've got each and every type of a South African in the ATM because it is a party for everyone.
And how do you see yourselves differentiated from the ACDP, for example, which also has a strong Christian faith element in it, whereas you seem to be acknowledging that but wishing to also go beyond merely being characterized as a purely religious entity?
Yes, with the ACDP and many Christian parties, they want to impose biblical principles to South Africa. Whereas we as the ATM, we understand that in South Africa there's Christians, there's Muslims, Rastafarians, there's people that even do not believe there's a God. Hence, our focus is not on the biblical principle, rather than, but our focus is on the values of Ubuntu and peace, because all of those values, they unite us. But the biblical principles, we find that a Muslim will not agree, for example, with some of the scriptures or some of the ways in which the Bible says a person must live. You've got a lot of people in our country that do not even believe there's a God. So the ATM is a faith-based political party that internally we're saying we are driven by higher power, but this higher power understands there's 58 million South Africans, and it is ours to serve all of those 58 million South Africans and not impose any of our faith ideologies on South Africans.
Sure. So I want to try and get a bit more detail on what that looks like in terms of your policies and your practices as a new entrant. But let's clear up one, let's say, myth, because there's a view in this election that President Zuma is creating these parallel political structures from ACM to ATM to BLF, in some ways to consolidate political power outside the ANC and then use that against the Ramaphosa grouping which controls the ANC. What do you say about this mainstream media narrative that I think has been sort of put before you, that the ATM is someone else's, maybe even President Zuma's plaything?
I think one of the key issues in our country is that you've got a media that wants to be part of politics. You do not have a media that is objective, a media that wants to tell people's stories as they are. And there's a saying that says, if you are repeatedly told a lie, you'll end up believing it as truth. And that is the case with the ATM, because a lot of people will say it's Datu Zuma's party. But if you're to check currently, where is Datu Zuma campaigning? He's campaigning for the ANC. Now they are using that narrative that all of these parties are Zuma parties, trying to shift the association between Datu Zuma and the ANC, because now people are not viewing the ANC as a political party of Datu Zuma. So when the ATM was formed, it was formed by the coming together of many religious organizations. And the fact that Datu Zuma used to attend the church services of these churches does not make him involved. Similarly, Datu Mbeki also used to attend these services from these churches. Datu Mandela as well. Now, the ATM has got no association with the former president, and what is out there in the media is pure mischievous lies, because the media has gone as far as saying, myself, I'm a Zuma supporter, I'm a Zuma loyalist. Yes. And the media can never even produce one photo of me in an ANC t-shirt. They can't produce any membership form, because I was never a member of any political party, let alone the ANC. So our greatest threat to democracy, I could say, it is the media, because politics is all about perception. Now, if the media is creating certain perceptions about political parties, then it is creating those perceptions, and people now will not have their free will to decide on what is best for the country, rather than they'll be influenced by the media as to what to think, or what to think basically about the people.
And I think I'm with you there to the extent that the mainstream narrative in this election has been very sensational. And when it's looked at other political parties outside the ANC, the DA, and the EFF, they've been very simplistic narratives. And so tell us a little bit more about you and your involvement in ATM and the fact that Tatu Mzwanele Manyi, who joined the party and who was at a press conference in January, actually joined a moving vehicle as opposed to started this party himself. And take us through just the way that your party's been framed and the reality as you see it as the ATM.
Yes. Now, the party was, remember, a lot of consultation and engagement with these organizations took place as early as 2015 to say we need to take a stand in the country. We need to unite and influence the direction of the country rather than standing back and just saying we're going to pray. Because you need to supplement prayers with action. Now, in 2018, we had to go around to all of these organizations now to speak to all of the congregants. Now, in 2018 June, that is where the name was approved by IEC, and now the party was formally registered. We started launching on the last weekend of September, every weekend up until the 1st of December when you launch our manifesto. We try to invite the media in all of those launches, but zero coverage. Now, when Ubhuti Mzwanele joined in January, it was as if we're a new party, whereas we've been quite in existence for a long period of time. We've been having all of these events, and if you were to check our social media pages, you would see exactly the kind of work that we are doing and the kind of reception that we are getting from the people. Therefore, what the media has done, it has created that perception that this party is a creation of Ubhuti Mzwanele, and to a lot of people who might not perhaps like him as a person will have a negative attitude towards the ATM because it's as if it's his party. Hence, if you were to look at the media stories, for example, in Nyandeni, they're not reporting factually to say ATM gets 30% of the vote. They'll say Manyi's ATM gets 30% of the vote. In other words, they're trying to create that narrative that this is a party that belongs to an individual, whereas the ATM is a party that belongs to the people of South Africa, not any individual.
Sure. So I want to move now onto some policy areas and some of the things that you've been saying in your manifesto. And I think maybe one key failure in this election, I think, across the board is the question of gender representation. And I see that, you know, some people may have a fear that because you're based in a faith-based ethos, you maybe might fall victim to a patriarchal way of performing your duties as a party. On the other hand, I saw in your manifesto that the empowerment of women is actually quite a central piece of that manifesto. So can you take us through how your party is going to tackle the question of gender inequality in our country?
Let me start with the relationship between now these organizations. To a lot of people, if you were to speak, for example, about a young 31-year-old leading a party, they would say not in any religious organization, it needs to be an old man and all of those things. But here I am as a young person leading this organization and getting the full respect from all of these church leaders as well as members, no matter how old they are. Now, on the question of women development, us as the ATM, we understand that the women are central. In fact, they are the backbone of our lives as South Africans because, firstly, they are more than the men in the country. Secondly, if you were to check the quality of the work that they produce in the workplace, in our homes, it clearly shows that they've got an important role. Therefore, as the ATM, we are prioritizing them by our solutions. There must be women involvement because we know once anything has got women involvement, it's most likely to succeed.
And do you have any policies on gender representation within the party? Is that something that's important to you?
We do not have what you call a set quota because on one side, immediately when you bring a quota, we do not want to fix a problem by creating another problem. Because if you have a quota that says there must be an X a number of women in the party structures and so forth, then it means the men will also cry to say, look, we are saying we need to be equal, but again, we're not treating, we're not guiding the party based on equality, because we're dictating how many women must be in the structures, how many women in government. However, what we're saying is that as the ATM, there must be an equal platform so that each and every person, regardless of their age and their gender, can participate and influence not only the party, but also the government.
Okay, and I know another key pillar of your manifesto is this question of economic ownership. Can you take us through your views on ownership and, in fact, how they're quite different from the way that other parties are speaking about questions of economics in South Africa right now?
Yes. With economics, I only did economics at first year level, but I think the basis I learned there, for any economy to grow, you need the money to circulate in that particular area. Now, that speaks to the ownership of the economy. The economy in the country is structured into the formal sector as well as the informal sector. Now, the informal sector is worth billions of rands in the country, and the informal sector is basically the backbone to a lot of people, because we've got a lot of people in the country which do not have the necessary skills and expertise to compete in the formal sector. Now, with our huge poverty levels and unemployment levels, the informal sector needs to be for the exclusive use of South Africans, because that is the main way in which you can arrest poverty and deal with unemployment. Because if you were to look, for example, in the rural, inner city as well as township economies, those economies are not owned by South Africans. They are all owned by foreign nationals. And it comes naturally to them as the foreign nationals. Each and every time they make a profit, they'll always send it back home, because it comes naturally to any person. That is why money is not circulating in the country, because there's a lot of, our economy is drained to these foreign countries through the informal sector. So that is why we as the ATM were saying, if our economy is not owned by South Africans, we'll cry about our economy not growing for years and years to come. And if we want to deal, for example, with the issue of xenophobia, if we're to look at what causes people to be xenophobic, they are actually crying because the government, because you have foreign nationals that are coming to the country, dominating South Africans in their own space, meaning in the township, rural and inner city economies. Hence, people always react. Now, to have a short-term solution, it is to say people must not, they must not be xenophobic.
Sure.
But to have a long-term solution, you address the real problem. And the real problem is the ownership of the microeconomy by foreign nationals instead of being owned by South Africans.
And you make an interesting point in your manifesto that the lack of ownership in that informal economy is also mirrored by the formal economy, where South Africans also don't have full ownership of that economy.
Yeah, because if you're to look at our minerals, firstly, they're not owned by South Africans, and they're not even owned by the state. Now, you find that even now we have all of these minerals. They're taken to all of these countries as raw materials. They're processed there. After being processed there, they come back as final products, and they're sold to us at ridiculous prices. Now, what we're saying as the ATM is that the ownership also of the raw materials needs to be here in South Africa. And we need to engage the world on our raw materials from a position of strength, because it can't be that we take all of these raw materials to Korea and Japan, they make all of those cars, and they come back to us and dictate how much all of those cars will cost, whereas we are the owners of the raw materials.
So I want to move to just one final area in this part of our conversation, which is on crime, which is another central part of your manifesto. Take us through your proposals on questions of crime and how we can reduce these chronic levels of serious violence in our country.
Firstly, when you deal with a criminal, we can't beg criminals. We can't have that attitude that we need to beg criminals from killing our people, because we need to have a harsh sentences. We need to have tough actions on these criminals. So the first thing that we're speaking about, basically, it is what the people want, because what the ATM also wants to do, it wants to re-engineer government so that it is the people that dictate what should be done in government. And if you were to check, for example, go on social media, whenever, let's say, there's criminals, there was a shootout between the police and the criminals, and one of the criminal dies, a lot of people say, good riddance, thank you, one less person to worry about. Now, that clearly shows that the attitude of the people towards crime is that they must be dealt with harshly. So when we speak about the introduction of a justice-based capital punishment system for serial offenders, we're speaking the realities of the people, because the people are tired of crime. And there are people that are beyond rehabilitation. Hence, you find people, for example, 2 weeks ago in one of the prisons in the Free State, a person was there, he killed two, he raped one warder and raped and killed another one. This person is inside prison. Instead of changing his ways, he's committing further crimes. Now, it clearly shows that there are people that are a danger to society. And if you do not have a justice-based capital punishment system to deal with those people, we're not going to get anywhere.
When you say justice-based capital punishment system, is that the inclusion of the death penalty,
yes,
basically?
Yes.
And so what do you say to the view that if the death penalty was a deterrent, that would be fine, but there doesn't seem to be great evidence that it does deter? In fact, what we really need, and I wonder if this is also something that you accept, is at the lower levels of our criminal justice system. Magistrates, the NPA, if they were to do their work and actually people were to, because to me the problem seems to be criminals don't believe that they're going to get caught or they're going to get punished. What do you say to the view that we need to fix that rather than just have a capital punishment system at the top?
Yeah, let me first address the issue of being deterrent or not. Firstly, you have prisons in our country. A lot of people go in and out, but there's never a question whether is a prison deterrent to crime. Now, our focus or approach as the ATM is not about the being a deterrent, but it is about retribution. Because if you check, I think in the past year, I think close to 500 people were killed by mob justice. Now, that is people now advancing the retribution on their own instead of relying on government to provide retribution for them. Now, that is why you find, for example, now in Hillbrow, one person was burnt to death because he's stealing a cell phone, because people do not believe that government is providing proper and adequate punishment for certain crimes. So to avoid people becoming murderers through mob justice, we're saying as the ATM, introduce this mechanism and have the state being the one that will advance retribution on behalf of the people. Cool.
Well, we'll continue our discussion in further bonus material on the WhatsApp channel. But it's been a real pleasure to have you, Ndate, just for interesting context on your movement, on how much more complex it is than the way the media has presented it. And we really appreciate you representing the African Transformation Movement on SMWX.
Thank you so much. And thank you for this platform. I think it's engaging and we get proper time and a platform to actually air our views as to who we are as an organization and why people should consider voting for us on the 8th of May.
Sure, it's wonderful to have one of the youngest party leaders in the country. Good luck with the oldies when you get to Parliament.
No, relax, they'll be sleeping there.
Thanks, Data.
All right, thank you so much.
And
goes.
SMWX. No young people are around the decision-making table. Let some new voices come to the fore. Follow us on WhatsApp or catch us live Tuesdays and Thursdays. Out with the old, in with the new. SMWX.